Hello, I'm Mishcho, and welcome to Let's H. This week we have more updates from Black Goats and Bowl Book and Candle. If you like hot guys, fantasy and magic, check out Black Goats. It's at the Long Library, which is located at longlibrary.com. You can also check out Bowl Book and Candle. It's got a lot of sweet romance, some sensuality, and a little bit of kink. You can check that out at the Splash Pages, thesplashpages.com. There will be links in the comment so you can follow them very easily. I also have links to all of my social media and my Patreon. So please follow me on social media, message me, let me know if you like what I'm doing. So after the last couple of weeks of reviewing episodes of American Horror Story Hotel, I got a bit burnt out on American Horror Story Hotel. But my friends were saying, oh, you should do more reviews, you should talk about more things that you've seen. So I thought, well, I'll do that. I'll watch something and then I'll talk about it. So this week, I've got Friday the 13th, the remake, or rather reboot, kind of, from 2009. That is starred Jared Padalecki and Danielle Panabaker, and it was actually a pretty successful reboot of the series. Some people were saying that it was a failed reboot, which it really wasn't. It was pretty well received. It did rather well at the box office, and although people like to talk about Michael Bay in association with it, he really didn't have much to do with it. This was really a Marcus Nispel thing. But in any case, I am a big fan of the original Friday the 13th series, aside from a couple of the films in the series. Like, Part 2 I was just not there for. It was a neat idea, but it was a huge mess in terms of both production and the film itself. And Jason Goes to Hell? Hell no. I liked some of the stars. Like, you actually had John D. LeMay in it, which is wonderful because one of my favorite shows was Friday the 13th, the series, which had nothing to do with the films. It actually would have been better off called The 13th Hour. But it was an excellent series, very strong, and it was good to see him in a feature film. However, if one film was going to have to bridge the gap between the series and the movies, Jason Goes to Hell really wasn't it. But I'll tackle that another time. I don't really like to get off talking about that because I end up analyzing it way too much. In any case, Friday the 13th, the 2009 remake, was actually pretty good. I'm going to just say that. It was at least a lot better than the crap that was Freddy vs. Jason and the crapper that was Jason Goes to Hell. I actually like Jason X, but the thing about that is I saw it at the cinema and all of the people were really fun and they were very receptive and responsive to all of the jokes, all of the references, all of the gimmicky fun kills, you know. So that left me with a really good experience of it. It was one of those films that kind of was for the fans and didn't take itself particularly seriously, so I can really understand how some people didn't like it, because it wasn't really a serious film. It was more a film that was kind of taking the piss, and probably if I hadn't seen it at the cinema with such a good crowd, I might have a completely different story to tell. However, I have good memories of it. The remake is actually very ambitious, and this is probably its biggest problem. It tries to be and do too many things, and it should just be content with doing what it does well enough. You basically have 3 or 4 of the old film's worth of content condensed into one admittedly kind of longish film. It could have gone longer, but when you watch it, there are these stretches where you think, well, they're developing the story, but it feels like not a lot is happening. In the killer cut, they actually change some scenes around, elongate some other scenes, and add an entirely new subplot at one point. But unfortunately, that subplot doesn't really add anything, and it would be better off if it weren't there. At least for the most part. It does help in fleshing out the sister character, who otherwise is kind of dull and unlikable, but even in the killer cut she's dull and unlikable. I have to say she's one of my least favorite characters. I don't know whether it's the actress or the script or some combination of the two, but she never really makes a positive impression. She just kind of skates along until the end, where she does something kind of neat. But you know how people say you're waiting till the last minute to do something? Well, this is literal. She only waits until the last minute of the final confrontation to actually contribute to it usefully. Other than that, she's kind of useless and annoying. She even calls out in an annoying way. She's like, "Abby!" I mean, it's not exactly like that, but it really gets on your nerves. Like, she basically spends most of the film either sitting around or calling for help, and you get really sick of it very, very fast. The film does a good job of re-establishing Jason as an efficient, terrifying, and terrible killer. He's not the zombie of later films of the Friday the 13th franchise, but he is the backwoods murderer of the first few films, which most people tend to like and view as better than the later ones. Personally, it's about 6 one and a half dozen the other. Some of the later films do a really good job of presenting Jason as a formidable foe, even though he is really a supernatural monster at that point. But a lot of the earlier films have a kind of basis that makes it seem like it's almost realistic, like it could almost happen, and that makes it more terrifying, even if Jason does have that kind of tendency to quickly travel from one place to the other that typically doesn't happen in reality. The 2009 film does a good job of making Jason seem to be down to earth, but also capable of some exceptional things at certain points. He's imposing, he's scary, and he's deadly. He does defy the rules a couple of times on some of the kills, like an archery kill that's unexpected, and throwing an axe, which is also unexpected. But these are things that you can kind of excuse since, overall, they don't go into truly ugly, ugly territory. The killer cut is a little bit more ugly. They dwell on some things that they really shouldn't. They reuse some shots even that really didn't need to be reused. But overall, it kind of stays in the spirit of the older films. And in that, I can really respect the way that it tried to stay faithful to them. However, there's kind of a feel of some of it where you could get rid of some and just not really be out much. Some of the characters could go, some of the interactions could go. A lot of the second part of the film, well, maybe it's the third part. See, this is why it's so difficult. See, you start off with basically the end of part 1, where Jason's mother has killed several of the campers, and the single survivor kills her. This will be reminiscent to anyone who's seen it of the original Friday the 13th. Nana Visitor does a good job playing Mrs. Voorhees, and it's kind of neat that they got her to do the role. However, the actress that they got, who supposedly bears a striking resemblance to her, doesn't really bear a striking resemblance to her. This is where the second movie starts. The sister character, whose name is Whitney, goes on a trip with some of her friends. Of course, these friends are doomed. You think Whitney is doomed, but you later find out that she was kept as a prisoner by Jason because he basically thinks she's his mother brought back to life. Some people didn't see this, but it's pretty obvious. They find the locket with a picture of her, and someone says, "Oh, she looks just like you," and she's like, "Oh, she doesn't look anything like me," but she keeps it anyway. And when they find his shrine for his mother's head, they basically drop the head. So Jason, who is very simple in his thinking, sees that the head isn't there anymore. So it's kind of logical that he would think that, oh, she's come back to me because this girl looks like she did when she was young. I know it's stretching a little bit, but it's not really stretching that much, especially if we look at part 2. It's basically the same concept. Like if Ginny in part 2 had knocked off the head instead of just stepped in front of it and put on the sweater, she probably would have been able to pull it all off. Not the sweater, I mean the act. In any case, then the third movie starts, and that's where Clay, who is Whitney's brother, is coming to find her. Now this is where it gets kind of weird, because while I do like the traits that they give Crystal Lake, and the people in it, they just really don't want to be involved. They know Jason's there. They know that the legends are true, and we've already heard about the legend in the first film. But they don't want to get involved because it can lead to bad things for them. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to get involved either. But Clay is determined to find his sister because she was taking care of their mother. She had gone off on a little trip with her friends, and her mother had, according to the dialogue, said, "Go, go, have some fun." Because Whitney was taking care of her mother who had cancer. Her mother has died in the interim, and the last time Clay and Whitney talked, Clay apparently let Whitney down, and they had a fight. So Clay is now out looking for his sister, and he finds the assholes at the cabin. Basically, they're not really all that likable. There's one character who is kind of likable. Her name is Jenna, and she's played by Danielle Panabaker. And this is the character that I think would have worked a lot better as a more long-term character, but we don't really spend enough time with her as we should. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, especially in the killer cut, is spent beefing out Whitney's role, when Whitney is neither a better actress nor a better written role. So you get a lot more of someone that you really don't care that much about. Like, you only literally care about Whitney because Clay cares about her, and because you're looking at Jared Padalecki's fine ass through those painted-on blue jeans most of the time. They were very smart when they cast this movie. In any case, there's a lot of running around and investigating, and some of it works very well, I feel like. I feel like overall it's kind of a logical modernization of the Friday the 13th formula, because we really don't see a lot of people going to summer camp anymore. Definitely not as many as went in the year of 1980. So while you could see a lot of people going to the first Friday the 13th and thinking, oh, I went to a camp like that, or oh, I worked at a camp like that, nowadays you don't see that as much. A lot of people don't go to summer camp anymore, and so having it as basically a relic in the film as much as it is to many people in reality, that really worked for me. That it's something like a surreal setting, like an abandoned carnival or something like that, where people have heard about it, but they've never actually been to one. That really worked for me, and I really liked that. I also liked the fact that even though you really didn't care about most of the characters that were introduced in movie 3, you still felt kind of bad when they got picked off by Jason, because he was so brutal in this, and he came out of literally nowhere. He was very much an efficient hunter, and that was kind of interesting and important. It was neat that they gave the character back some of that brutality that had been taken away over years of the character becoming basically bowdlerized. Whatever your feelings are on the later films of the franchise, having Jason be formidable again and scary again, I think is only a positive. That's only a good thing. I know some people criticized the fact that there were some backwoods caricatures in the Crystal Lake setting, and some of them even compared it unfavorably to some of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre characters from the reboots of that series. However, I have to say, it didn't bother me, because I've been to places like that. Like, I know some people get insulted at these caricatures even existing, but I have to say, caricatures kind of exist for a reason, and there are a lot of people that are at least reminiscent of some of these characters in places like Crystal Lake. Obviously, it's kind of a remote place. It's isolated. The characters in technically movie 2, go to Crystal Lake because basically there's not a lot of people there, and they have reason to believe that this giant pot plant that they're going to find hasn't even been discovered by the locals, who probably don't even understand what it's for, right? So that's an assumption. It's a flawed assumption, we find out later. I don't think it's so unreasonable, and if we look at Crystal Lake in the classic series, Crystal Lake is pretty provincial. It's pretty out in the sticks. It's not some sort of modern metropolis. So I can kind of give that a pass. Also, the fact that the Crystal Lake inhabitants don't want to get involved, as I said, kind of adds to it. I liked the fact that we had Clay as a hero character. I liked that. I liked that very much. I especially liked the fact that he's a survivor of the film, because it seems like over the years, a lot of horror films have forgotten that there are dudes that survive these films too, and the whole final girl thing, it's fine and everything, but it's so overdone that at this point people see one boring, frumpy, or badass girl at the beginning of the film and they think, oh well, she's going to be the only one that survives and blah blah blah. That was never really a thing. See, that's the thing about it. And even John Carpenter said this when people were talking to him about Halloween and how they were asking if it was like a morality tale or something. He said it was never a morality tale. It was never intended as a morality tale. The people having sex and getting stoned were not wrong for doing what they were doing. That's not why they died. The reason why they died was because they were distracted. They weren't paying attention. They were having sex, they were getting high, they were getting drunk, they were doing whatever. They weren't expecting someone to actually attack them. However, someone like Laurie Strode in the original Halloween was babysitting. Of course she's going to be alert. She's going to be looking after these kids. She's going to be on the lookout for something to happen that she has to address. That's what she's being paid for. Similarly, in the first Friday the 13th, Alice is a very together person. She doesn't really party with the others because she's getting over some stuff. She's dealing with some issues. In the original script, she was working at the camp because she was having a fling with a guy that she later found out was married. A lot of people don't know this, but that was originally going to be a part of the character and the script. It was cut for time. She also got high with them. She drank with them. But she knew how to get serious when necessary. Nonetheless, in many ways, she just got lucky. There are many points in the film where she really just got lucky. There are other parts where, yes, she does fend for herself and she does a good job. But if you look at it, she's also tremendously lucky that Mrs. Voorhees didn't just pick her off before then. Also, I'm pretty sure they knew that Clay was going to be easy on the eyes to most of the viewers. So, yeah, I couldn't really fault them for that. It's really nice to see a different take on things, and see it also kind of get back to its roots in a way. I know some people might have a problem with it, but I didn't have a problem with it. It was perfectly fine to me. I had a good time watching it. I would have cut it down a bit, and I really also would have just stuck with one story. We didn't really need the lengthy flashback at the beginning that started the film, movie 1. We also didn't really need Whitney's group's film. We didn't need them at all. We could have just picked up with Clay looking for his sister and then told the rest of the story in brief flashback, or even just referred to her while he was talking to Jenna and say, oh well, my sister went missing somewhere around here, so I'm looking for her. While we did have a similar storyline in part 4, they didn't try to back-build a story. They just had the guy refer to his sister who had gone missing. Most people don't even know that she actually was a character in a previous film. However, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. They didn't really need to show even a flashback of her because ultimately it doesn't matter to the story. We are still invested in him finding his sister whether or not we see her encounter with Jason. The only real reason I can see of them doing this was to either up the body count or pad out the running time, which really also didn't need to happen. The body count was plenty high, and the running time was already long enough. If this reboot of the series is guilty of anything, it's really just the ambition part. It really just tries to do too much. It should have stuck with just something simpler, but it did fine for what it did. I don't know if the next film in the series, if there is another one indeed, is going to follow this or do its own thing. I don't know if it'll even refer to it. Honestly, with a series like this, just like with all the iconic film series, it doesn't ultimately matter all that much. And to be fair, this is probably one of the better of the reboot attempts at the classic horror franchises from the 70s and 80s. The less said about most of them, the better. Friday the 13th may be a bit dull in stretches, and it may do some things a bit differently than one would expect. It tries too hard sometimes, it doesn't try enough at others. Most of the characters aren't particularly likable, and nothing is really done about that, usually until they're about to die. There are some funny parts though, and there are some endearing parts of some of the characters. I have to say, the catalogue woman, that was hilarious. That will never not be funny. Though, unfortunately, as I said, it was just about the time where that character was going to be written out. Which I think is a shame. So many of these characters were only given meaningful development when they were about to leave the movie. That's too late for that to happen. Just like the main douchebags at the cabin, they were only ever given negative development. Both Trent, I believe his name was, and Bree. They were not particularly likable characters, but nothing was done with them except bad things to make you hate them more. And while that's perfectly acceptable, especially for characters in this genre, in this kind of film, I really would have liked to have seen them fleshed out a bit more. Because ultimately, it doesn't work very well to care about a character and to be invested in whether they survive or not if you don't really like them, if you're actually actively wishing for them to be killed off by the villain. This did happen in a number of the Friday the 13th films though, so I can't really be too harsh on it. The characters here are also kind of less caricatures than some of them. Like Melissa in Part 7, totally a caricature. She's a hilarious bitch, but she's also enjoyable, and you kind of feel like it's a shame when she gets written out of the film because she's so entertaining. She's horrible, but she's entertaining. But she's made to be written out of the film. So, Friday the 13th, the reboot. Is it good? It's pretty good. It's at least watchable a couple of times. I've watched it several times. I still have to watch it usually in segments. I'll start it on movie 1, watch through movie 1, movie 2, then watch through movie 3 part 1, and then finish off movie 3. And that's really the way I always seem to do it. I always say I'm going to just watch it all the way through once, but I never actually seem to do that. It's like I cannot start and finish it in one viewing. But it's not a bad movie. I think it gets too much shit. It's actually probably the best of all of the reboot attempts that I've ever seen of any of those series. And that's saying a lot. When you get down to it, Friday the 13th is the kind of film that does best when it follows a formula. And this one basically does follow a formula. It does its own thing in many parts. It also bucks expectations in some parts, and not all of them are good. Like, for example, getting rid of Jenna in such a cheap way. I know it was intended to probably be shocking, but it actually ended up being a negative aspect of the film because she was such a stronger actress and a stronger role. We were rooting for that character. We wanted that character to get to the end, and I know that sometimes you have a character like that you sympathize with or like or would really like to see make it through, and they don't, and that can be very affecting. But in a film like Friday the 13th, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because that actually actively interferes with someone investing in the film. The only good part about it is that it happens so close to the end anyway that you're already invested this long you might as well see it through. Fortunately, though, Clay, whom you actually probably do care about at this point because he's a nice guy, he's a fun character, and he has some funny lines, especially when he calls Trent on his bullshit. I love that. Because Trent is saying, oh yeah, you might want to leave before I get pissed off. And Clay's like, oh, what happens then? that was really one of the more amusing points of the film, which I really like. The delivery is great. Jared Padalecki is really good in this. And for once, he's not screaming Dean or keeping secrets or, things like that they do in Supernatural. I actually would have probably liked it better if he had had a missing brother that he'd been looking for, just to take that whole inside joke a bit further. And I can't help but think that him having a missing brother would actually be more dynamic and add more to the plot. It would just be funny in a way as a parallel of that famous role of his, probably his most famous role ever that he's ever done. But it would also kind of turn expectations on its side in a way that was non-offensive, in a way that was also more involving to a broader audience, because you don't expect that in these sorts of films anymore, since they've become so formulaic that you always have, this ready-made final girl. So I thought that was pretty neat. But yeah, I overall thought it was a pretty good film. I would recommend it. I would recommend the original ones a lot more, but there's nothing wrong with picking up Friday the 13th, the reboot, and watching it through and deciding if this is your kind of genre. It's true enough to the originals, but it adds a little bit of a modern feel to it too. Yet it doesn't have that gore porn and really excessive unpleasantness that comes from the modern age of the killer horror film. So what are your thoughts? Tell me your comments below, and I always try and address all the comments I get. Please do follow me on social media, subscribe to me if you like what I'm doing, and become a patron on Patreon if you want. I've got all kinds of regular content, and I work so hard on this, so I hope you have a lot of fun with me. Tune in again next time, when I'm going to do the same thing, but slightly different. Like Jason. See you next time. Goodbye.